Russian losses reached critical levels. Today, 150 Russian soldiers were neutralized in a single operation. Soldiers joining the army for mobilization react to the Kremlin. Putin is crazy. The US sending Patriot systems to Ukraine angered Putin and the Kremlin government. Russia's credibility and authority in the world collapsed. Russia's allies began to turn their backs on Putin. Continuing to lose at the front, Moscow is looking for a way out. Giant aid package to be sent to Ukraine was accepted. The biggest aid package since the beginning of the war has been approved by Western countries. The coordination of Russian army was broken. Before the winter season is fully felt, Russian army will experience a great collapse. After Zelensky's talks, Ukrainian army will be re-equipped. Kiev announced that Ukrainian army will be completely modernized. Ukraine is very close to becoming a member of European Union and NATO. Experts made very important warnings. A strong Ukrainian army could cause Putin to use nuclear weapons. USA warned Ukraine and Kiev. The tension is higher than ever. During the day, very critical statements were made from both the West and Russia. However, Moscow started the day with the attacks of Ukrainian army in the first light of the morning. Ukrainian army carried out very strong attacks on the military base of Russian Air Force in Kherson. The attacks were carried out by HIMARS, MORS, multiple rocket launch systems and artillery units. According to the first statements, Ukrainian army carried out 4 attacks at regular intervals in the region. Each of the attacks lasted about 15 minutes. According to the reports published by Ukrainian General Staff, as a result of the operations launched, at least 150 Russian soldiers were neutralized and 50 Russian soldiers were injured. In addition, military equipment in the area was heavily damaged and destroyed. Various types of heavy battle tanks, armored vehicles, radars, and Russian air defense systems were destroyed. It was stated that with the completion of the operations, 21 Russian military equipment became unusable. Shortly after, a large aid package was approved by the United States in the State Senate. A $45 billion aid package has been approved for Ukraine and allied countries in the region. The White House announced that there will be an increase in aid packages sent to Ukraine in the coming days. American Parliament has unanimously passed the bill on the government's funding of $1.7 trillion. This budget includes approximately $45 billion for the support of Ukraine and Washington's allies. 68 senators voted in favor of this bill, 29 senators opposed it. Lindsey Graham, a senior U.S. senator from Republican Party, proposed an amendment to the bill that would allow the confiscation of the assets of Russian oligarchs and their transfer to Ukraine. Later this week, U.S. Congress plans to approve the U.S. budget in the coming days, which includes the additional allocation law for Ukraine, which covers about $45 billion. The Senate passed this bill by voting. However, the final approval will be given by U.S. President Joe Biden. It is thought that the draft law will be approved after the positive talks between Zelensky, Biden, and Biden. Major expenditure items include $14.5 billion for the transfer of goods from the U.S. military warehouse to Ukraine, $9 billion for the purchase of military aid to Ukraine, and $13.37 billion for financial aid by presidential decree. These funds will add to the record-breaking $858 billion in defense spending this year. From here, the bill must be approved by the House of Representatives and then signed by U.S. President Joe Biden for it to take effect. This needs to be done by Friday, otherwise the American government will shut down. If a shutdown occurs, deals are suspended due to failure to create an agreed budget. However, in today's voting, the Senate announced that this budget was ready. Therefore, the agreements are expected to be approved by Friday evening at the latest. United States continues to send aid to Ukraine one after another. After the last statements, Putin went crazy. Hard statements come one after another from Moscow. Putin is angry that the U.S. is sending Patriot defense systems to Ukraine. Putin answered the questions of Russian journalists about the agenda at the Kremlin Palace today at noon. Russian President Vladimir Putin reacted to the U.S. shipment of Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. It's an old system and it doesn't work like our S-300s. The employee is doing it for nothing. It just prolongs the conflict, said Putin. Pointing out that Russia's military resources are more than Ukraine's military resources, Putin said, "I will not give the number of artillery shells we use during the day. These numbers are quite large, but Ukraine's resources are going to zero. Kiev's capacity will be zeroed." Putin, "I think that the military resources of Western countries and NATO countries are not on the verge of exhaustion, but the issue here is different. Weapons to Ukraine come from the former countries of the Warsaw Pact. Most of these guns are Soviet-made. These are about to run out." I can say that Putin's statements are quite contradictory. First of all, it is clear that Patriot air defense systems have proven themselves worldwide. You can listen to technical information about Patriot air defense systems from many war experts and compare them with S-300 defense systems. In this process, Patriot and S-300 air defense systems are not in the same classification. They are highly technological and powerful systems compared to the Patriot's -300s. Patriots have a much higher range than S-300s, and these air defense systems have very powerful radars. We know how big problems Russia has with radars. Due to the lack of air control and very old Russian radars, Russian Navy lost exactly 3 large warships and about a dozen warships. We know that many port areas and ships were damaged in Crimea as well. On the other hand, if these air defense systems do not pose a problem for Putin, Russian army can respond to these statements by successfully conducting ground and air operations. On the other hand, it is known that Ukraine has deficiencies in weapons and Soviet-made military equipment is decreasing. But as we can see, USA, European Union countries, and NATO continue to support Ukraine one after another. If there was a huge shortage of military equipment and soldiers in Ukrainian army, the Russian army could take control of many areas. If Ukrainian army is about to run out of resources, why hasn't Russian army been able to seize the regions it wants for 300 days? In addition, according to the statements of neutral research companies, it is known that the Russian army still has a large number of warplanes. But Russia's biggest problem is ammunition and experienced soldiers. If Moscow hadn't made a deal with Iran and bought a large number of drones, its missile stocks would have been nearly exhausted by now, or the Russian army would not be able to launch missile strikes for a long time. Compared to first days of the war, the missile attacks of Russian army decreased by 80%. Armed forces of Ukraine began to dispose of obsolete and Soviet military equipment. The reason why Ukrainian soldiers receive training in European countries is to learn new generation military equipment and NATO standards. For this reason, it is known that Ukrainian army has a military inventory at the level of NATO countries. Putin's statements certainly did not reflect the truth. The only correct information in the statements made is that the Soviet-made military equipment in Ukrainian army has begun to be reduced. But as I mentioned, Ukrainian army has a new generation military inventory. I am not saying that Russian army remained completely collapsed in the process. Russian army still has quite a lot of military equipment. It has much more military equipment than Ukrainian army, but this military equipment is old generation and very neglected. Therefore, it is impossible to make a direct comparison of military equipment. Despite Moscow's advantage in military equipment, it is very difficult to solve its problems with experienced soldiers and ammunition. Russia has to go through a very long preparation process, but the Ukrainian army is much stronger now. In this process, if Ukrainian army can make more progress on the front, Putin will have to sit at the negotiating table.